Do you believe that the U.S. empire is in irreversible decline right now?
Um, yes. I mean, theoretically, things could turn around, and we could adopt new policies. I think the relative decline is inevitable. There's nothing that can be done by that. Even if we adopt the wisest policies. What I mean by the relative decline is just the corresponding rise of other powers, and we're just talking about pretty much the rest of the world: China, India, Russia, Iran, Brazil, and so on and so forth. All these countries are going to grow. There's nothing that the U.S. can do to stop it. I think rather very stupidly, and in the end, uh, very much to its own harm, the United States is trying to stop the rise of China and Russia, in particular. Certainly Iran as well, and they can't do it, and they've just made they've we've seen the results. They've drawn together. They've created alliances or quasi alliances among themselves, and there's nothing we can do to impede their rise. We could just we could allow them to rise and maintain friendly relations with them, and their rise could be to their benefit. But we've, of course, have chosen a very different kind of policy, and we've turned them into enemies. And so their rise does not need to threaten us, but we have chosen to make them a threat to us. Um, yeah. So again, it's just that this relative decline is irreversible. It's because when we again, because other countries were going to rise no matter what. But that was not a problem. I mean, that was something that we could have accepted, and it actually we could have allowed their rise to contribute to our general prosperity and well-being. Um, Now, because of the policies that we're adopting, um, we it's not just a relative decline, but I think we are entering into an absolute decline. The weaponization of the dollar, for example, has put the dollar, which has really been one of the, a tremendous blessing to the United States, having the world's reserve currency. We've put that status at risk by our weaponization of it. Again, is using it as a weapon against perceived enemies. Um, and so there, potentially, we're putting our own economy at risk. We've gone greatly into debt. And the only reason I think that we haven't suffered the consequences of that yet is because of the fact that the U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency, and so other countries just tend to they buy our debt. They're paying for kind of shouldering the burden of our excesses, of our fiscal recklessness. But I think inevitably that's not going to last, and we're going to hasten the demise of the dollar through our policies. That's just one example. Again, it doesn't have to be an absolute decline. Theoretically, we could continue to prosper. We could actually, become an increasingly prosperous nation, and a nation respected by the rest of the world. But we've chosen another path, and
Do you,
increasingly we're hated by the world and feared by the world, and um, yeah.
do you see us getting off that path and taking on a better path? Because the decline of the American empire doesn't necessarily have to equate to the decline of America. It
Right,
could
that's
be a
right.
chance for an American renaissance in a sense.
Exactly. Exactly.
So do you think that's possible? I'd like to.
Yeah, well,
We're
theoretically, it is possible. I guess that's the point that I was trying to make. Theoretically, it is possible. We can accept the rise of other powers, and then we can, again, just kind of retire from our position as world hegemon in a graceful, a gracious way, and actually do quite well for ourselves. Again, there's no reason why that has to have any kind of negative consequences. In fact, it should have positive consequences. For example, we can put down the burden of these 800 or so military bases around the world. That's expensive. That's an expense that we don't need to have, and that's just one example. This world empire is costing us, and we could, that's something that we could simply again, we can shed those responsibilities and prosper. Um, Unfortunately, I don't see, I just don't see any hope, any sign of renewal. I pointed out there's certain bright spots within the upcoming administration, but I don't see any reversal of the trend. Though of course, Trump uses his slogan, "Make America Great Again," America first. He continues to insist on America being the world's hegemon. So again, we had that threat, for example, when directed at the BRICS countries. He was going to slap 100% tariffs on all of them if they so much thought about, creating their own currency. And it's just the same kind of thinking. I think, unfortunately, it's the same kind of thinking. There really isn't, as far as foreign policy, as far as our relationship with the rest of the world, there's no reason to think that things are going to change in the upcoming administration or any foreseeable administration.
Right. So you don't see any hope of basically accepting a multipolar world,
No,
of
I don't see it at
accepting
all.
there are no politicians, nothing in our government institutions that will really allow for the dropping of the U.S. hegemony.
No,
That
I do not see it. I don't see anybody who's even close to, a leadership position who is talking like that. Again, you can find somebody that is reasonable on Russia, but still, it's because it's part of the larger strategy that we have to go after China or something.
exactly?
Again, it's still they still believe that America is the world's hegemon. They just have a slightly different approach to that. That's all there is. You have to go way, way down to somebody like Thomas Massie or whatever, who isn't anywhere close to the levers of power to find an American politician that is actually talking in a truly different way.
Well, if there is, you don't see anybody willing to accept the new world, the new reality. What does that mean for America? Well, where are we headed then? If you don't see, you said we're headed for an absolute decline, because theoretically we could accept the decline of the empire and embrace, the new world order, which is a multipolar world, and we can have an American renaissance where we start to prosper from the prosperity of other countries instead of
Right.
continually trying to control them and manipulate them, subjugate them. So what does that mean for us in the world?
Right.
Does that mean we're headed
Okay.
for an ultimate showdown? Because that's kind of
Yeah.
what it feels
well,
like.
Okay. Yeah. Well, first I discussed briefly some of the possible economic consequences. Again, in particular, the consequences of weaponizing the U.S. dollar. But of course, the more that we become involved in these conflicts, the more confrontational we are, the greater the risk that we will actually be drawn into a direct conflict. Maybe, so far we've avoided that. We've come up, we're getting awfully close, for example, in Ukraine. Potentially, it's close that we could be in a direct conflict with, involved in a direct conflict with Iran. We did participate in the most recent Israeli attack on Iran, right? So one or another of these conflicts could draw us in directly. We're just right there, towing the line, standing at the edge of the abyss, and of course, the consequences of a direct conflict with Russia could be catastrophic. We all know what that might mean. It's not inevitable that it would go nuclear, but it certainly could. And then in the case of Iran, we've talked about how, I don't think it wouldn't be nuclear between the U.S. and Iran, but it could be catastrophic for military or U.S. military bases and ships in the region. It could lead to a humiliation for the U.S. And again, that theoretically that could be a slap in the face, and we sober up and we begin to reassess. But based on what we've seen, that's not what happens. It'll probably lead to some sort of jingoistic reaction in the U.S. and more trouble. So, yeah, that's what I see. Unfortunately, the policies that we're pursuing are very reckless, and they could lead to direct conflict at some point in the not so distant future.